Hello everyone, I'm Laura Cornish. I'm the Editor-In-Chief of Mining Review Africa, coming to you from Mining Indaba 2022. I am joined today by Bert Lopes. Bert is a Director for the Global Mining Division of BDO. Bert, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Laura.
So I think one of the key themes coming out of Mining Indaba this year is ESG, quite a big topic for the industry in general. What are some of the biggest ESG risks that companies are facing at the moment, Bert?
Biggest ESG risks? Well, there's a few to name, but I'm going to try and focus this on the key ones. Non-compliance with ESG is just a no-no. And if you look at all your stakeholders, you look at both from investors, funders, and the negativity of that from that side. You're also looking at the regulators. They're starting to get a lot more teeth. And then you're looking at a lot more of the international reporting that is starting to filter through. So those are the more significant risks. There are obviously a lot of opportunities that go with those risks, and from those opportunities, mining companies can look at those.
Okay, a lot to deal with, but
a lot to deal with.
Good to put them on the table, I suppose. Hey?
Good to put them on the table.
Bert, what are some of the typical measures that should be used to improve the collection and reporting of ESG data as a way to gauge performance and demonstrate progress against key indicators?
Well, you've got to have a deliberate plan, and those deliberate plans follow from your strategy. So you set a strategy, and what's your plan to execute your strategy? And there's various aspects that you can be measuring, and all the factors on the ESG side have got different elements. It talks to the people side, it talks to the environmental side, and obviously your governance side and how they impact. So how you, as a mining company, positioning yourself, you've got to look at also, as simple as it is, what do people want? The normal employee wants a job. The normal employee wants security around that. There's an element, obviously, of the social side to create a sustainable business and support them. But as part of the bigger group or bigger mining company, you've got to execute on the way you're mining, the impact it's got on the environment, energy and the energy transition conversation, and how you generate energy. You've got all the rehabilitation aspects and how that impacts on the mining operation, very much around reporting.
Okay.
And then all the governance issues. Are the audit committees, the board of directors, very familiar with the mines or the mining companies' aspects of the ESG? Because you've got to live it. It's not a tick box. You've got to be living this ESG journey, and we're seeing it more and more. It's old hat adopting ESG. Now everyone's in it, and it's just how intense is it?
So important that it's not a tick boxing exercise,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
You've got to live it.
Got to live it.
So Bert, what sort of steps do you advise putting in place to ensure follow through on ESG strategies and to ensure ideas and those strategies translate into actual action and positive material impacts?
Okay, so a couple of actions you can put in place. Usual will be monitoring from an environmental perspective. So signing up in terms of the rehabilitation plans, your mining plans that you're going to execute, the impact it's got on the environment, very much then following a process and accountability around that. From a social perspective, there's so much demand from the social environment, whether it's the communities around, whether it's the dependency of people in terms of governing regulators and so forth from a social perspective. So you can measure those. Those are all measurable because you can actually tick whatever you fulfilled on the social side, social deliveries to the community, to employees. Those are all measurable components, whether those are measurable by monetary, whether those are measurable by benefits, by greater employment, and then obviously on the governance side, it's all around the compliance, governance aspects of it. You can measure those also in terms of the audit committees taking responsibility for their governance, reporting on it, and it's a filter of the independent report. Have you lived your strategy, implemented it, monitored it? The key thing is the strategy is only a way of doing it. You've got to have various scenarios and amending it to those scenarios. And have you measured those to your strategy? Are you looking forward on your strategy?
Interesting, because I think a lot of companies feel that ESG can be a bit vague or a bit broad. But if you're saying there should be measurable points and that you can actually measure those, then you can start to put proper strategies in place, right?
Yeah, look, it varies. Every sector, every industry has got different measures. So if you're looking at the automotive versus a manufacturing versus a mining, they will have different elements to measure. Overall, they've got an impact on the three ESG, and it's just how you adopt from your own strategy the key ones that you're needing to measure going forward. What's the consequence of non-measure? There's obviously consequences going forward. I mean, I think that will build more into the non-compliance, penalties, bad from a reputational perspective, reputational impact. So, you're going to get into quite a lot of negatives if you don't follow a very structured strategy and plan on execution.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bert. So we've had some great insights from Bert, and we're going to continue the conversation with Karien Erasmus. Karien, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Laura.
Karien is a sustainability specialist with BDO. Karien, the just energy transition, big topic in mining, is a prime example of the need to proactively engage in, proactively integrate, the social component of ESG into sustainability and strategic economic discussions. Do you think that social and labor plans across mining sectors should incorporate the principles of a just energy transition?
Thanks, Laura. I think you hit the nail on the head. The just energy transition is exactly that. It is an example of this integration that we're seeing coming more and more to the fore in terms of ESG. It's the environmental components from an energy perspective, it's the social components from an impact perspective, and it's the governance components from a support, a regulatory, and a driving strategy perspective. Now, if you look at, for instance, the new guidelines that's been released by the JSE for companies to report on in terms of sustainability, just energy transition plans feature quite heavily in those guidelines. So at some point in time, these guidelines and these recommendations are going to find their way into regulatory documents such as your social and labor plans. Now, our SLPs already make mention of impacted communities. They already make mention of skills diversification. They already make mention of investment in certain basic infrastructure. And that's exactly what I believe is needed for the just energy transition. And those elements should be considered from this perspective of a changing energy and a changing economic landscape to ensure longer term sustainability.
Interesting points raised there, Karien. Thank you. So with the establishment of, let me get this right, the new International Sustainability Standards Board,
Yes.
How do you see the nature of ESG reporting changing, and what do you feel should be focused on from a standards perspective by the ISSB in terms of the mining sector?
So the ISSB is, as I've just said, really the starting point for this integration. ESG is no longer the kind of softer issues that we're seeing. It's no longer qualitative information and a nice story. ESG is data-driven, it's performance-driven, it's target and financially driven. And what the ISSB is starting to do is to bring all of these different frameworks together so that one could have a sense of comparability, one could have a greater sense of transparency and accountability related to our reporting. So I think one of the biggest things that we're going to see is this shift towards, as I've said now many times, integration. The ISSB starts using the principles of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And they want to see how sustainability is integrated across your mining operations from those four aspects. It's no longer about a separate sustainability report. How do you marry sustainability and your ESG aspects with the financials? So I think one of the key things that we're going to see specifically from the mining sector is more stringent performance targets. We've already seen net zero coming up quite a number of times. We've started to look at what happens across the value chain. I think that's going to become increasingly important, not only from your operation, but also what's happening across the value chain of the use of your product, the use of your mineral at the end of the day. And that's going to be something that you need data for, that you need to report against, and that you might have to set a specific target for at some point in time.
So I think it's quite interesting because clearly we're not at the beginning stages of ESG. We're getting to the next level there, Karien. I mean,
hashtag next level ESG reporting.
Indeed. So Karien, climate change adaptation, it also featured quite prominently in COP26, as we know. What do you believe are the most critical climate adaptation issues facing South African mining sector today? And how should mining companies build these risks into their ERMs?
Climate adaptation has always been, last year I wrote something and I said that climate adaptation is like the girl that's been invited to the dance, but nobody quite gets up the courage to ask her for an actual dance. So we've been focusing on mitigation and we've been focusing on emission reductions to get to a 1.5 degree world. Whereas that narrative is slowly shifting to focus on saying, look, whether we like it or not, climate change is happening. It's happening much quicker than we expected. It's happening within the context that what we thought was a safe threshold is in fact less safe than that. And I think it's becoming more and more important that when we talk adaptation, things like climate risk assessments, looking at climate vulnerability modeling and integrating that into your risk management process is going to be so important. What do I mean by that? If we look at typical climate modeling, your IPCC scenarios, even using available technology at a number of mining sites, using weather station data, doing basic weather modeling, and overlaying some of those trends that you see with your existing risks will already paint you a better picture. We've seen in South Africa over the past month or so the devastating floods in KZN. Those types of significant events are increasing. And so if we just think from a tailings dam perspective, the type of social, the type of economic or reputational environmental risks that hold for a company. If we think, we spoke earlier about social and labor plans, if we think about the impact of long-term drought and food security on labor sending areas, and the fact that suddenly people would move into mining areas at a rapid rate, or people look to mining companies for help and assistance, this starts to paint a different picture of climate change. It's a much more tangible, it's a much more immediate response that's required. And as I said, I think it's time that somebody asked adaptation to dance.
Karien, it's been such a pleasure. You are undeniably a sustainability expert there. You talk about the subject so passionately. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks.
It's been great to chat to Bert as well.
Thanks.
Thanks again for joining us. Please visit www.miningreview.com for more videos from Mining Indaba 2022.